Hey guys, welcome back to the Bass Tutor. My name is Tyler Fry, and I'm the Bass Tutor. So guys, the nights are getting colder, the days are getting shorter, and the leaves are beginning to fall. And so with that being said, that means the fall season is upon us. In most parts of the country, we're all experiencing this. So what I wanted to do is go through and make my top 5 favorite baits for each type of lake. And today I'm going to go over my top 5 favorite baits for deep, clear lakes and reservoirs. You know, a lot of the time that I fish, I'm typically on deeper, clear lakes. I fish in a very mountainous region, and so a lot of our lakes are deep and clear. And so with that being said, if you don't live on a deep, clear lake, you can stick around and watch the video. You know, obviously more information isn't going to hurt. Or if you want to come back in a week or two, I should have a video pertaining to you. And also you can leave me a comment down below what type of lake you live on, whether it's got grass, muddy water, wood, you know, whatever the case may be, I'm going to cover it. So, with that being said, today we're going over the top 5 deep clear lakes. The number one lure that I like to throw this time of year, especially in the early fall, is a walking bait like this spook. And typically the spook is my go-to. It's typically tied on. You can see that thing has got a lot of teeth marks on it. It's got a lot of rash on the back half of it. You know, it's been worked a lot. And so the reason for this, especially this bone white color, just seems to get bit this time of year. And what I'll do with this lure typically is I will find a schooling shad or find bass that are in shad. And what I'll do is I'll fire this thing over top of them. I'll work it pretty fast, and these fish will come up out of the shad and they'll hit this thing. Because this is typically going to be just a little bit larger than the average shad. It's going to be bright white, so it looks more massive. And they just want to get that big meal in before wintertime. And so if you watch the last video I posted on Monday, you'll see that I made a bank fishing video and I worked this spook over top of shad. What happened was I was on this really long, shallow point, and I was fishing from the bank. And these fish would push the shad up on this point, and I would work the spook over them. And these fish were coming up, and they were coming up so fast that their whole body was coming up out of the water. And so what happens in that case is, typically those fish are suspended, you know. Those are probably the little bit larger fish that are hanging out under the ball of shad. So what happens if you're not familiar with this, typically your smaller bass will get into the shad, and they'll start eating the shad, and they'll fall down. And then the bigger bass will come through and they'll eat the ones that are already dead or dying, and they'll come below the school and they'll eat those. And so what I think was happening is I was catching the little bit larger bass that were sitting below these shad, but they saw such a big meal and such a great opportunity that they wanted to come up and hit it. And so as they were coming up, they had so much momentum that they were blowing the top water out of the water, and they were coming up with it. Now, this isn't always the case. You know, sometimes they're super fast, they're far away, they come up and they hit it. But typically when they're coming straight up like they were hitting this spook is when they are suspended. If they were hitting it at an angle, I would think that they were, you know, a little bit deeper, but they were kind of far off, so they had to catch up. You know, you learn these little instances that happen with these topwater lures and stuff like this. But with that being said, the early fall is especially when I'll throw this. And you know, you will throw it some in the mid to late fall, but if you have a major decrease in your water temperature, then that's typically when that topwater bite's going to turn off for the year, and it's going to be time to throw some of these other baits. And so my second favorite bait to throw is a swim bait. Something like this 3.8 Kitech or this 3.8 Bass Pro Shop Speed Shad. These are super phenomenal lures. And whether you rig them up on a underspin, which I typically do on sunny days, or you just rig them up on a jig head, or you rig them up on an Alabama rig, they just get bit this time of year. You know, the main forage in the early fall to mid-fall is shad or baitfish if your lake has that. And so these fish see another fish and they just want to eat them. And they want to eat as many as possible. So this time of year is a lot of the time when you see people start getting double ups and triple ups on crankbaits and Alabama rigs and stuff like this. You know, a lot of the time that happens because you get these fish that are starting to school up, and they chase bait fish, and you run an Alabama rig through some bait fish or something like that, and those fish, they just come up and hit, and it's a feeding frenzy. So that can be a really exciting thing, and I'm hoping that we can do that this year and get on a good Alabama rig bite for you guys. But I wanted to keep it just simple and just use the swim bait. You know, that's typically what I'm going to have tied on. I'll have one tied on every time I go to the lake. They just get bit this time of year. And so as the months start getting colder, and as the water temperature in your lake starts decreasing, that's whenever I'm going to start throwing the jerkbait. Something like this Stacy 90 or this Rick Clun jerkbait or even this Yo-Zuri jerkbait. And so they've all got their own little uses, we'll say. So, like I discussed earlier, you know, those fish that sit below those shad, those bigger fish, when I know that those bigger fish are sitting below them, if I go over and I graph them and I see on the graph that there's fish below the shad, and I see that they're in there like 10 to 12 foot range or even a little bit deeper, you live on a clear lake, so these fish are going to come up and they're going to hit it from a pretty good distance. So that's when this Stacy 90 really comes into play. You know, it's got this really large bill on it, so it dives a little bit deeper. And so what you can do is you can reel it down, and you know, you want to cast way out past these shad, reel down, and then jerk that thing, and just let it pause. And, you know, in the early fall, you can get away with twitching it a little bit faster. You can pop it a little bit faster. But as you start getting more cold fronts, you know, whenever the water starts decreasing, that's when these fish are going to be suspended and they're going to kind of get a locked jaw on them. So you're going to want to work that thing, and you're going to want to start that winter pattern where you just let this thing sit down there. And it's an absolute pain in the butt. But when a big fish is cruising by and it's been eating all these shad, all it's going to do without thinking is it's just going to come up and grab it. It's not going to be an aggressive hit, you know, especially in the late time of the year. It's just going to be a light grab of it. But in the early time of the year when you're really jerking that thing around and you're ripping it through it and then you just stop it, that's when those fish are going to come up and just clobber it. So, another one I like to use is, like I said, is this Yo-Zuri. This is a super small jerkbait. You know, this is, you know, you can tell it's about the same size as the Stacy 90, but it's got a smaller bill on it, so it's not going to go as deep. So if the fish are up in the shad, but you're not seeing a lot below them, or you're just wanting to get a quick limit together, you could throw this small Yo-Zuri jerkbait down in there. You can jerk it through the shad. So you'll be working it in the shad, and these fish will see a jerkbait that looks just like the shad. You know, it's about the same size, and they're going to come and they're just going to hit it. It works super great. And like I said, with this Stacy 90, as the months start getting colder, that's when this smaller jerkbait's really going to come into play. So as the months start getting a little bit colder, what you're going to do is you're going to push these shad colored baits to the side, and you're going to start working in a few more crawl patterns, something like this little wiggle wart. Now, I will throw some shad patterns every once in a while, but as they start getting down below the 50s, you know, fall is really decreasing. Wintertime is basically already here. That's when these crawdad patterns are going to start coming into play. That 60 to 50 degree range is when the crawdads start getting super, super active. And you'll notice that the fish, they're not really chasing shad anymore. They're not coming up and they're not busting. You're not seeing shad on your graph as much. And so they're starting to get a little bit less active. Now, I will throw a shad pattern wiggle wart, or I'll throw a shad pattern DT6, something like this, when they start chasing these crankbaits a lot more. But typically I'm going to focus on something like this wiggle wart or a bandit, or even my favorite, which is a rock crawler and phantom crawl. If I get you on that bite, you can thank me later, because that is a super phenomenal color for clear water. Just don't tell anybody I fish against. But with that being said, that time of year, the later fall period, is when I'm going to start throwing that crankbait. And that's going to be number 3 on my list. And so, as it's starting to get colder, we're all starting to dread it. It's winter time is coming quick, fast, and in a hurry. These baits are going to work great. You know, they're going to work great, especially through the early to mid-fall. But the closer you start getting to winter, the less these fish are going to be active. And that's when I'm going to pull out number 4 on the list, the jig. This one right here is just a regular old football head jig. It's an Oops color by D&L, and it works great in clear water. I'll put something like a Rage Crawl on there, or something like this Christie Critter Crawl, something like that, or even a Speed Crawl by Zoom. And I'll work this thing on the bottom real slow. And a lot of the times you're going to get super big bites doing this. It's got a big profile on it, and those bigger fish are wanting to feed up those last few meals before wintertime, and they're going to grab this thing, and they're going to probably put up a pretty good fight because they're hungry, they've ate a lot, and they're going to be thick fish. And so the last one on the list is the one we all dread the most. As winter's coming in, these fish are getting a lot tougher to catch, and a lot of them are suspended. And so that is when the last one comes into play, and that is a drop shot. We all dread fishing it oftentimes, but typically a drop shot is going to get you those bites that you need, especially if you're in a tournament. You can find them on the graph, or you can just blind cast this thing around, flip it to some next to cover, docks, whatever the case may be. You can drag this little drop shot around and you'll catch them. Something about it just gets bit. Typically, I'm going to throw something like this little KVD Dream Shot by Strike King, or this little Bama Bait Straight Tail Worm, or Zoom makes one just like it. Something like that's going to do really great. Or you can throw something like a Fluke, or something that's a shad profile. Something to look like a dying shad will do really great. All of these baits have their key roles throughout the fall, and they're by far my favorite techniques to do. They just straight up get bit. But there's not a time that I'm going to go out this fall and not have one of these baits tied on, or all of them. Typically the jerk bait for me comes in a little bit later in the year. I don't like throwing it until I absolutely have to start fishing for those suspended fish. Don't get me wrong, I love the jerk bait. I've caught some big fish off of it. But typically that's going to be later on in the year for me. Typically the spook, it'll get put up once the water temperature reaches about 53, mid-50s is when I'll put the spook up for the year. That's just me personally. A lot of people catch them 50, 40 degree water, whatever the case may be. I've heard of a lot of crazy instances. Whether they're true, I don't know. Typically for me though, about 55, 54, something like that's when, I put the spook up and I trade it out for the jerkbait basically, is what happens at that point. Crankbait works all the way through the fall and the winter time for me. Jig is all year round, and the drop shot is all year round. So these 5 baits and these 5 techniques, you just can't go wrong with. So guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, leave me a thumbs up, subscribe, like, comment, the whole 9 yards. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoy what I'm trying to do here and trying to help you guys out and trying to be the best bass tutor possible. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you're able to get out this fall, and I hope to see you on the water as we get out there and wet a line. We'll see you guys later.